Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Dr. Maggie Wray from Creating Positive Futures Academic Coaching, where we are on a mission to help high school and college students develop the time management, organization, and study skills that they need to earn better grades with less stress. And as you know, if you've got a high school student at home, getting into college is one of the biggest sources of stress for most high schoolers. And so that's why I'm so excited to be back again this year, hosting our annual Your Teen Ready for College conference, where we get to pull together people who are in the college admissions world, who are doing this work every day, helping set students up for success in this process, to help share some insights and strategies with you all that you can use to navigate this process, hopefully with your sanity still intact by the end and your relationship as well. So one of the huge sources of stress, I think, in the whole college process is actually how on earth are we going to pay for this? So that's what today is all about. And I'm really excited to be here talking with Andy Lockwood from Lockwood College Prep, who's going to be sharing some ideas about how to maximize the amount of financial aid you can get from your college. If you don't know Andy yet, he's a best-selling author on college admissions and a financial aid expert. He and his wife Pearl host the College Planning Edge podcast. They run College Talk Tuesday on their Facebook page. They also offer monthly webinars. They're just such a great source of information and insights that you're not going to necessarily hear anywhere else. So we're really lucky to have Andy on with us today. Thanks for joining us, Andy. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for putting this together. And I was just saying to you off the air before, I'm impressed and a little intimidated by how much effort you're putting together to make this event happen. So thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. It's so much fun doing it. And I love getting to share these ideas with people who might not otherwise get access to this information. I feel like that's a big thing you do as well, is you're trying to pull back the curtain a little bit and share with people what they can do to control this process and feel like they've got some power to make a difference. Because it's especially, I find we work with a lot of families who are stuck in this really awkward middle, especially when it comes to paying for college. They're not so in need that they're going to just get a free ride, but they're also not just so wealthy that they're going to just pay for this and not even notice. So I am curious about parents who are stuck in that awkward spot in terms of what they can do to help college maybe a little bit less of a stressor for them financially. I think there's this belief, well, we're not going to qualify for anything because we don't qualify for for the need-based aid, and also this is just not something that we make too much money to actually qualify for any aid. I am curious, though, is that always true, or is there anything that those families can be doing to make the financial strain of college a little less?
Well, yeah, that's a great question, and your whole premise about this being so stressful, both getting in and paying for college, really just ratchets things up. One of the reasons it's so stressful is that there really isn't a good, solid source of information out there, other than people like you who put events like this together. Because most guidance counselors are not experts in how the financial aid and scholarship system works. Because the average ratio is something like 400 or 500 kids to one guidance counselor, depending on where you live. And most CPAs or accountants and financial advisors are not well versed at all in the nuances of financial aid. The simple form, the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid, is straightforward looking on its surface, but there's 1,100 pages of more than 1,100 pages of regulations behind it. Ooh. That can really trip you up, and all kinds of landmines and a few key loopholes. So it's really, it's really a lot to ask anyone, and becomes very stressful. But what a lot of middle class, or what I call forgotten middle class families, fail to realize, or they just make this mistaken assumption, is that they're not going to qualify because they think that they make too much money, or they've been told by a brother-in-law's sister's aunt whose kid got an early decision to Penn, who's now an expert on everything about college, that such and such school doesn't give money. Mm-hmm. And most of the time these things are not true. They're more urban legend than fact. And there's no magic. For example, there's no magic income number. I get that question a lot, like how much do you make before you're not going to qualify for anything? The reason that there isn't, you could scour the internet high and low, but you'll never find it. The reason is that it doesn't exist because there are 77 or 78 factors that go into calculating your eligibility for money. And that's, income's important, but it's not, but it's, by far not the only one. So that's one of the biggest myths.
So it sounds like that's one of the biggest things families need to do is actually throw out those myths and stop just assuming based off of hearsay, or based off a guidance counselor who's not fully informed. And not to say we don't, really appreciate the work that guidance counselors are doing. I know a ton of them and they're wonderful people. They're just overtaxed, like you said. And I think you're right. My guidance counselor gave me horrible financial advice. He said, don't apply to Ivy League schools because you can't pay for it. And we were that family who was in the extreme need-based side of the scale. And so luckily I was, a high school kid who'd actually done my reading and knew about need-based financial aid and that they're going to let you in and that there's going to be some sort of financial aid. So I kind of ignored him completely and applied. But I think back sometimes, what on earth would have happened if I had listened to my guidance counselor saying, don't bother applying because you can't pay for it. And it's that kind of advice. So it sounds like the number one thing to do is make sure you're getting accurate information and you're not just going off hearsay.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on guidance counselors. I get accused frequently of bashing them, but I really don't intend to. It's I think most of them mean well, but sometimes they they stray outside their wheelhouse and they don't realize it. And same thing with parents. I mean, it's really the same thing you're suggesting, which is not to just assume that the fact that you're not going to get money is a foregone conclusion. It may not be a fact. And the Ivy League colleges happen to be the most, among the most generous in the country, particularly for not just low-income families, but families who make, six-figure incomes. So, you really need to go in with a blank slate.
Mm. Well, so then I do wonder about that a little bit, Andy. How do parents find out that information about which colleges are most likely to give money to their student, depending on their situation? I'm curious if there's some way of figuring that out that isn't just based off myth or hearsay.
Yeah, that's the $250,000, $300,000 question, right?
Right.
So I can give some general principles, but understand
Sure.
that there's a lot of moving parts, and a lot of it has to do with who else is applying that year, how badly a college wants you, because they engage in a practice called preferential packaging, which means that two families could look the same financially on paper, but if one kid is more desirable, more outstanding than the other one, then chances are that child is somehow going to get more money. But generally speaking, the private schools, the most expensive schools, typically not just Ivy, but the private liberal arts colleges that tend to be clustered in the Northeast, but, for the most part, not exclusively. Those are the ones that have high sticker prices, but they're also the ones that are most likely to discount. The average discount that I just saw a couple of weeks ago, which gets revised every year from the National Association of Collegiate Business Officers, crazy group of people, by the way, real partiers, is now 52.4%.
Wow. So half off, basically.
Yeah, more than half off on average. So in contrast, most state schools are really stingy with need-based money. There's different types of money. There's merit, which we should talk about also.
Mm-hmm.
But the state schools, they just don't have it. It's not so. A lot of times, parents are surprised when they're comparing two sticker prices. The expensive private school versus the state school, whether in-state or out of the state that they live in. And they think, okay, the state school is going to be more affordable. And then when the financial aid offers come, they get bupkis from the state. And they get, a lot of money from a private school. Or like in your case, you kind of ignored the advice that you'd gotten about not applying to Ivy League colleges. But in many cases, parents don't, or kids don't ignore that, and they forego that opportunity. And then they find out later, wow, I really could have afforded it because I think that they would have given me more money than the state schools that don't have it.
Right. Okay. So that's one big thing to take into consideration is those private schools. Yes, they're more expensive, but they also have deeper pockets. They've got more money available to give out. You mentioned need-based, but also merit-based. So what's the difference in terms of how you might want to approach this process if you're looking for merit-based versus need-based aid?
So need-based is based on the information that goes in the boxes, so to speak, even though they're electronic at this point, of the financial aid forms. And the main form is the FAFSA, free application for federal student aid. I know I said that before. It's like a reflex, though. And then there's and every college in the country requires that. And then there's an additional form that about 400 or so colleges require in addition to, not in lieu of, but in addition to the FAFSA, called the CSS profile, which is used mostly by colleges that have their own endowment money. And it's about twice as long as the FAFSA. It's probably 10 times as hard. I personally don't fill them out in our practice. My wife does, because she does the real work around here. So you have to fill that out depending on the schools. By the way, a big mistake that people make sometimes is they fill out one but not the other. They don't realize that. I just talked to a guy yesterday who made that mistake. So sometimes it's hard just to keep track of all your requirements and deadlines and all that. Those are like clerical types of things, but sometimes they result in losing tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, that's talk about stress. There's a lot riding on just getting these forms in on time.
Right.
Anyway, so that's how colleges will determine need-based aid. Merit-based aid means basically anything that's not need-based. So most people think of it as devoted to kids with high grades and high standardized test scores. And that's certainly true, but it could be also used or allocated for people with certain community service, attributes, or athletic athletic scholarship money is a subset of merit. So is performing arts like music or acting and all that. So it's a catch-all term that could mean anything that's not based on your income, your savings, and the other factors that go into the need-based aid formulas.
And are the same colleges that give more aid for need-based, are they going to be the same colleges that give more aid for merit, or are those going to be different schools?
Those are usually different schools, but there is some overlap. So for example, Ivy Leagues and, there's 8 Ivy League schools, and then there's, another 20 or 30 schools that claim to be purely need-based. And I say claim because I've seen some crazy things in my 19 years of doing this. That are not explainable. So I don't think they're purely based on need, but and we can talk about that if we have time. But for the most part, the elite schools tend to be, the near Ivy caliber and the Ivy caliber schools tend to be need based. And then when you get down, to I hate to use the term, but the lesser schools, the ones that are slightly easier to get into, that's where you start seeing merit-based offers more frequently. And they're pretty much based on, how desirable a kid is for that particular school. How is that child going to do in terms of classing up, their average grades that they report to U.S. News and World Report, and the average SAT scores and all that. So, in contrast, if you have to beg, borrow, and steal and scratch and claw your way into a certain college, chances are you're not going to get merit aid because, again, because it's mostly based on grades and scores. If you want a rule of thumb, which I tell a lot of people, I think one of the best ways to sort of figure out if you're going to be able to qualify for merit-based aid is if you look at last year's kids, the cohort of kids who were admitted, and you can figure out what the college reported was their average GPA and average standardized test score, and how many kids were admitted, and you can figure out, you can back into how you stack up compared to them. If you're in the top 10, 20%, 25% maybe, you have a much better shot at getting merit aid than if you fall below that.
Mm-hmm. That does make sense, because otherwise, if you're in the middle, you're not going to raise their average because you are their average. So obviously they're not going to want to pay a bunch of merit money to get you at their school.
And I'm oversimplifying. There's other reasons, like for example, maybe you come from a really affluent family and you're on the development list. So instead of making you Photoshop your way onto a sailing team, they might instead, try to, buddy up to and curry favor, with your parents, and hopefully, end up working that relationship into some sort of, donation to their endowment. And sometimes the kid is not at the top of his class, or in that 10 to 20, 25%, will still be issued, maybe a $15,000 scholarship or something, just as like a thank you, as a token or a gesture.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing, I think, that makes parents start to worry. Oh my gosh, what do we do if we're not the parents who have the $250,000, $500,000 to pay for our kid to get into a school, or that type of thing? It does make me wonder. I mean, what would you say to a parent who's worried about that? About, oh my gosh, we're not that kind of family who's going to get on get a merit money because they think we're going to donate a building or something like that.
Well, I would say first, get $1 million together. Don't worry about it. Second,
in your spare time, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just don't overcomplicate it. No, I think if anything comes of this scandal, the in this post Felicity Lori era. I do think that there's going to be a little more, I guess, tiptoeing around, pay to play type college admissions. I don't think that's going to be, because I've seen just anecdotal evidence of a lot of the colleges sort of now starting to self-police more, so that if they're not going to stop taking donations, but they might stop taking donations in exchange for, or the appearance of being in exchange for, a slot in the class. So I think that is changing. Like I said, anecdotally, I believe that. I also think it's going to be a little bit easier to get into college for the kids who are not fabricating all kinds of stuff, in their activities section and their common application. And I think there's going to be a little more heightened due diligence somehow. Now, I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know if that means that guidance counselors, who we already talked about, are kind of overworked, that they're going to now have to log into everyone's college applications and in effect certify the veracity of what kids are putting down in their application. But I do think there's going to be something that's going to police things a little bit better, so that the regular kids who you and I work with, who may have felt a little anxious about not having 15 extracurricular activities, 3 of which involve curing deadly diseases, and 2 were building villages single-handedly in sub-Saharan Africa or something. I think that they should just relax a little bit. And I think there's going to be hopefully a little more sort of reality that comes in, and a little bit less stressful. But understand also that admissions officers are very sensitive. They think of themselves as professional. They don't want to be seen as just rubber stamping people who are ultra rich to getting in. And I've heard firsthand stories from admissions officers at Princeton and other really competitive schools where they didn't admit the developmentless rich kid because they thought that he was just kind of a jerk.
So they are really trying to do a good job and admit the right people. And so I'm glad that hopefully the end result of this will be a more fair and honest process for the kids who are going about it the right way. So hopefully it'll end up being a good thing in the end for most kids.
You know what? It's way more transparent, right? The saying is, the best disinfectant, the sunshine, or something. That was a Supreme Court judge who said that. I think we're still at the beginning of the scandal too. Right. I think there's more to come out.
Yeah, well, we'll see where that goes. Come back next year,
right.
for more updates. So,
well, it's such a word of mouth business that we're both in as advisors. So I'm just waiting for more of these people who are facing sentences to turn on and rat out their friends to reduce their own sentences. It's
going to be interesting to see where it goes. It's such a crazy world, but.
Yeah.
But it does make me wonder some of the things that parents can be doing that are in their control, that are not faking things, that are not lying. But for example, you mentioned earlier those financial aid forms, and there are so many different pages and pages and pages of the legalese behind how these forms are interpreted. Are there things that are maybe not deep in the details, but maybe just the first couple things you might check for to make sure a family is going about their application the right way and not leaving money on the table that could have been really obvious if they just knew how these forms worked?
Yeah. There's so many mistakes that are made, and there's mistakes of commission. I mean, things you do wrong, like transposing social security numbers or dates of birth or things like that, which seem kind of silly, but if they result in your application getting kicked back a couple of weeks later and the deadlines have passed, then it could be a problem because the money may not be there that you should have gotten. And then there's mistakes of omission, which are sort of, not understanding some of the loopholes and, including stuff that shouldn't be included or not including things that should be included, things like that. So I can certainly run through a few of those.
That'd be great. If there's a couple of them off the top of your head that, again, not super deep in the details, but just a few, so people have an idea of the kind of things they need to be watching out for.
I thought we had like 6 hours. I wanted to go really deep.
I would love to stay here for 6 hours, but people might have other things to do. So give us the short version. Let's go from there.
Now you tell me. Okay. So, so one of the first things anyone should do, I think, is, and they're not perfect, but I would go on the net price calculator of any school that you are interested in applying to. For the last, I think, 4 or 5 years, they've been mandated to post net price calculators, meaning a rough estimate of what your eligibility should be at that school. And they ask you a few questions. One of the flaws, by the way, is that they don't all ask the same questions. But they ask about income, they ask about other stuff. That'll give you an idea. There's also a calculator on the FAFSA website, the FAFSA.gov website, and I think it's called FAFSA Forecaster, and that's another good way to sort of figure out how you look on paper, and that's sort of a starting point. Sometimes a lot of parents freak out. They're like, they expect me to pay what? There's no way I can afford that. So what both of these tools don't help you with is to figure out how you can possibly improve your eligibility. So that's the next thing to look into. And there's all kinds of books that are out there. I've written one. There's another great one by the Princeton Review that was written by a guy named Cal Chaney, which is more of a textbook compared to mine, which is more like a child's book. It's great if you have trouble sleeping. And those go into some of the strategies. So just broadly speaking, sometimes, and this is not 10 out of 10 parents, this is maybe 2 or 3 out of 10 parents, sometimes parents can improve their eligibility just by sheltering, not hiding. That sounds a little aggressive and sleazy. Their savings, because some types of savings accounts will penalize you more than others in the financial aid formulas, and some don't penalize you at all. So in many cases, what the Wall Street Journal once said about financial aid is true. It's not how much you have saved, it's where you have it saved. So specifically, money saved in a child's name tends to hurt you much more than money saved in your name as a parent. And then there's some places that doesn't penalize you at all. It don't penalize you at all. And sometimes people can shelter the money that way. I'm happy to talk about those if you think it's going to be beneficial.
Yeah, what's an example? Because I'm just curious. This isn't something that I have a lot of expertise on, so I'm really curious. So what would be an example of something where they wouldn't even look at that at all versus something where they would count it 100%?
Okay. So you're about to be an expert. So you're sitting down?
Awesome. I am.
Because this is probably the most riveting interview you're going to do. I mean, when you talk about financial aid formulas.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay. So,
I'm a math and science person, so I love this stuff.
Okay.
Bring it on.
And your heart is strong? I mean,
I think we're safe.
All right, good. So I won't make any more jokes. So there are 4 types of accounts or assets that are sort of buried on the FAFSA in the directions that are exempt. Meaning that on one hand, you might be able to use some of them as shelters to move money into and legally and ethically off of your quote unquote financial aid balance sheet. Conversely, this happens probably more, if you by accident include some of these savings or assets that should be excluded, you're shooting yourself in the foot because you're sabotaging your eligibility. So you should think of these 4 exemptions both ways. Both in the positive, maybe I can use them to shelter some improve my eligibility by sheltering some of my money. It's kind of like Medicaid spending, where people have senior citizen parents and they move money out of their names to qualify for more health benefits like Medicaid. So we do the same thing in financial aid. So the 4 exemptions on the FAFSA are: number 1, your primary residence. So that should not be included on the FAFSA. There's a question, what's your net worth, or what's the net worth of your investments? And then it says do not include such and such and such and such. So primary residence, not investment properties, but primary residence only. The second one is retirement accounts. That a lot of people mix this one up a lot. They over, how if you're posting something on Facebook about your the last meal you had or your toes by the beach or something, you're oversharing. That's just annoying. But if you overshare in financial aid, it's deadly. So if you mistakenly put your 401k, your 457, your IRA, et cetera, on there, then you're going to reduce your eligibility. So those are 2 big ones. And the next 2, number 3, number 4, are annuities. Those are completely exempt on the FAFSA. And insurance products with cash value are the 4th class of asset that is exempt on the FAFSA. So just because I'm starting to twitch, because I practiced law for 5 years in the 90s, before I'm still recovering. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not giving anyone advice. I'm sure you've explained that also. And these are just sort of general tools. I'm not saying that everyone should run out and start investing in these things, because
Right.
there's exceptions. And just to complicate things a little bit more, colleges that take the CSS profile, I was just talking about the FAFSA, but colleges
Mm-hmm.
that take this other form, they treat two or three of these assets a little bit differently.
Okay. So if they take the CSS profile, then they're going to, what you just said doesn't apply.
Well, so in some cases, so for example, insurance products are exempt on the profile also.
Mm-hmm.
Annuity products, some are, some aren't. On the profile, your primary residence is considered an asset, so that is not exempt at all. And retirement accounts are not supposed to count against you, but they're disclosable. That's a whole nother mess, and I don't really understand that. But supposedly they don't count against you on the profile.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So your retirement accounts pretty much always are not going to be taken into consideration as money that they're expecting you to pull from to pay for college.
Yeah, I think there's a public policy, behind, okay, that's your ultimate, safe money. Same thing with insurance.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to, assess you, the equivalent of a tax on that. So we don't expect you to, right, exactly. We don't expect you to use that as a resource to pay for college.
Mm-hmm. Which does make sense, because I guess the government doesn't want people to end up in their retirement having no money because they've spent all of it on their kids' college education. So they want people to be saving for retirement. But it is something that's kind of good to know, because I'm guessing some families might be pausing on saving for retirement because they're wanting to put more money in their kids' college account. But then that's going to count against them, I'm assuming.
So a couple of things. So again, I'm not a financial advisor, but one of the
Mm-hmm.
greatest things I ever heard was, you can borrow for a lot of things. You can borrow for a home, you can borrow for a car, you can borrow for college, you can't borrow for retirement. So
Mm-hmm.
it strikes me as not a good move to sacrifice your retirement in exchange in lieu of put your kid through college. I don't think that makes common sense to me. But also, yeah, once the money is in your retirement account, it's exempt. But when they look at your income, which we didn't really talk about yet, the contributions that you make to your retirement account. So let's say someone has, just to use numbers, so if someone's watching has a child graduating 2020, what the formulas and the forms look at is income from 2018, your tax returns from 2018. So if a family made $120,000 but contributed $15,000 to their retirement accounts, on their tax returns, they're going to show $105,000 worth of income. But for financial aid, they're going to add back that $15,000 contribution. So in effect, they can't double dip. They can't lower the taxes and get the benefit of qualifying for more financial aid also.
Okay. So what else can families be doing, do you find, to maximize the amount of aid that they get for college, or the amount of money that they get from a college that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, well, just to kind of reinforce the point, I think the more desirable you are to a college, the more generous they are likely to be. Even if a college claims it's need-based, and I mentioned this before, Ivy League colleges are, everything they say publicly, they give awards only based on need. There are no merit scholarships at Ivy League schools. However, I've seen this almost every year, and last year was one of them, where I had a client who ran the table. He got into virtually literally every place he applied, including a couple of Ivies and Stanford, and his top choice school was Stanford, but he got into Brown, he got into Princeton, and Princeton, for whatever reason that I've seen in my own little practice, seems to, even though they look at the exact same financial aid forms as all the other Ivy League schools, they seem to give the most money. So
Yep.
two families, yeah.
Mine as well. That was the exact experience I had. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I wonder how long this has been going on.
Yeah, that's a very long-term trend. They were by far the most aid I got from any school.
Yeah. Okay. But then what we did was we used that Princeton offer and went back to with this student. We went back to Brown and said, listen, they gave us this. Can you take a look and reassess our eligibility? And so Brown came up, like $20,000 because of that. I had another kid a couple of years ago who played Princeton off against Harvard, and Harvard said literally, well, Harvard doesn't match. But let's just take another look and see what, so they went from literally zero to $7,000, then ultimately to $51,000. So,
Wow.
so that's not need-based. Right? I don't care, what you call it. And it's made me kind of cynical about the whole process, frankly. But I always try to negotiate. So that if there is, a tip here, it's that don't assume that your offer is written in stone. It's not a final offer. It's potentially negotiable. Every family should try to appeal it or negotiate it. The best chances, I think, are, number one, the best defense is a good offense when you have offers from other schools that compete with that particular school. Another one is that if you have extenuating circumstances that didn't fit cleanly in the so-called boxes of the financial aid forms, such as out of the ordinary expenses, or you had an unusually high income that was non-recurring. For example, you sold some stocks or something that you used to pay for college and artificially inflated your income. There's a story that they don't know about, as opposed to, well, we live in an area where we pay a lot of property taxes. They know that because they see your application and your zip code. So, so those are grounds for appeal when you have, unusually high expenses or some sort of change in income or something weird with your income.
That's really good to know that you can appeal offers, because that is definitely not something that I knew when I was applying. I just assumed, okay, well, I get the letter in the mail. This is what we've got. And so we're going to make our decision based off of this. It's interesting thinking back, and I wouldn't change it. I mean, Princeton was a great school, but there are some other schools I actually had higher on my list that if I had known about appealing and had gone back and they had matched the offer, I probably would have made a different decision. So
it's plenty of company. Yeah. I mean, I think because usually because kids are so thrilled and parents are so thrilled to have gotten in somewhere, particularly Princeton or any Ivy League school, they're just so grateful and they're like, oh, great. And they don't, pause to think, well, wait a minute, this is kind of a business decision also. And, if you ask me, colleges are businesses, even if they're nonprofit.
Oh, of course they're businesses, right.
Yeah. Well, they don't pay taxes on their earnings. So that's why we always say, you don't accept that as a final anything. Try to get some more out of it, because, I say this to all my clients. You guys are in business too. Well, even I say this to the kids. Even if you don't know it, you're in business too. You're in the business of learning how to promote yourself, to sort of improve your standing and get what you want, which is getting into your choice school as well as getting money. And because they look at it as a business transaction, you need to look at it that way also.
Well, maybe for families who have not even thought about the idea of negotiating an offer, and I definitely hadn't, and I know we've got a resource we'll share a little bit later that goes into more detail, but what are some of the real, just super basics? I mean, do you call them on the phone? Do you write them a letter? I wouldn't have even known where to start.
Yeah. For the most part, colleges have a little bit extra paperwork for an appeal, and it's usually checking off a couple of boxes and writing a written explanation. I prefer to do that first before making a phone call, because usually what happens with the phone call is they'll say, okay, we'll send you a form and explain it to me. So so sooner or later they want it reduced to writing. So we start there. And then and when I'm working with clients, I sort of lurk in the background, not in a creepy way, but it's it's a little bit better if I'm the one sort of drafting it, and then they edit it, and then they ultimately send it off, because it seems kind of silly to say, hey, I hired this high-priced gun to help me get more money from you. What do you think?
Right.
So it's it's usually better if either the child or one of the parents approaches the financial aid office or the admissions office if it's a scholarship, because those are negotiable also. Every administrative person in a college claims that they'd rather hear from a child first. I think a lot of kids are capable of doing it. Sometimes parents are a little reluctant to let their kids do it, but that'd be the top choice in my book.
Well, a kid doing it, writing the email, doesn't mean a parent can't be there supervising, right? I mean, you can always proofread. Just because you're saying the kid's going to write the email doesn't mean they have to go write it all by themselves and never get anyone else to look at it.
Right. Absolutely.
So that's good to know. I didn't realize you can negotiate scholarships as well. How does that work?
It's really the same. If sometimes when you look up on any given college the requirements to earn a particular, like the chancellor scholarship or the presidential scholarship or something, usually the requirements are a little squishy. And so they'll say things like, well, recipients of the presidential scholarship tended to have GPAs of 3.6 or higher and tended to have blah, 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 blah.
Mm.
So they leave themselves some wiggle room. I think one reason is frankly, I think that if they had a hard and set guideline, then all they would get would be a flood of applications from people that met these criteria, and the college couldn't afford, to give all that money away. But I also think that they're a little vague about it, just because it gives them a little leeway, for special situations like when there's a better offer from another school.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like the best possible scenario here, if you're going to negotiate, is to have some sort of other offer in hand from another school that you can then bring to that college who didn't give you as much money or who didn't give you that scholarship and say, hey, we got this offer from this other place. Can you take another look and see if there's anything else you can do to help us out? Because we really love your college. We'd love to go there, but we just can't afford this difference. Is that kind of how the letter would go?
Yeah, I can tell you. You want a quick case study? I can do it.
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay, so I have a client who's his daughter's now graduated. She graduated USC a couple of years ago, Southern Cal, the original USC, not South Carolina. And when I was working with her in 11th grade, her 11th grade, not mine, she identified USC as her top choice school. She was a communications kid, and I said, okay, great. I think you should also apply to a couple schools that compete with USC, just so we can hopefully solicit a better offer. And if we have to use it, we use it, because her dad he owns a restaurant. He's very business minded. About half my clients are self-employed, so they all sort of get this, and they agree everything's negotiable. So, and I'm in Long Island, in New York, so of course everyone tries to negotiate everything. So she said, well, what do you mean, like Pomona or something? I don't really want, or UCLA. I don't really want to go anywhere else. I said, well, I'm actually thinking about some schools on the East Coast, like Syracuse, has a great communications program, Newhouse, and some other schools. And so she said, okay, I don't really want to go there, but she realized that wasn't the point. So fast forward, she gets into her top choice school, and she got a $23,000. It's $23,000. She got a $23,518 award. It's because it's never a round number. It's always in form. It was a combination of need and merit, and that was a great award. But Rick, her dad, was like, listen, I the school at the time was like $65,000. She's like, I can't afford to send her. I need more money. I said, okay, great. We should appeal it. And we did get a better award in the 30s from Syracuse, and I think maybe GW as well. So, I drafted up a letter, sent it to him. He edited it, and then he sent it off. And then, to give you the short version, he didn't hear anything. He called. He couldn't get a call back. The May 1st deadline for housing deposits was coming, so it's really stressful. His daughter's crying every night. He's telling me all this. I'm like, Rick, I don't have feelings, just call. Okay, I'd say, okay. So anyway, he ended up, kind of like not, after like the third call that he didn't get returned, he says to me, I don't understand, like, how can they just ignore me? So I went through my little checklist with him, and I said, did you, send this to your financial aid office? Yes. Did you attach a copy of the Syracuse offer? Yes. Did you include admissions? And he's like, no. I forgot. I remember you told me that. I have this on video, so I can prove it. And I'm going to do that right now.
Include admissions, like the Office of Admissions on
the actual specific admissions officer assigned to her territory, her high school. So the way Rick describes the outcome, he got a call. He faxed it. This is how long ago this was, and he got a call either the same day or the next day from his admissions person. And she said, "I didn't know anything about this. Who are you working with in financial aid?" He goes, "I don't know. I can't get anyone on the phone." She goes, "Well, I'm gonna go put this on the right person's desk, and you'll get a call from him." And the guy called, I think the same day, and he asked Rick a couple of questions that were really more about the value of his house, because I guess in California they didn't really understand the Long Island values the way that maybe Syracuse did or something. Just speculating. And he ended up getting his offer increased that next day from 23 to 53,000 and change.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, so it was a big swing, and most of that was need based, but some of it was merit. And it was because, and I think it was because the people in admissions, they really care about the the yield, the number of children that actually matriculate versus who get admitted, because that the better that ratio, the better it is for the college's reputation and all sorts of other financial considerations that are too boring to get into. But the financial aid people are sort of the bean counters, and they're overwhelmed. And a lot of times you get kind of stuck with, kids on work study, or, low level, people who are not really there to help you. They're
Mhm.
running businesses, so they're not going to make it easier to get their money for you.
Wow, huge takeaway. Make sure you copy your admissions representative. Oh my goodness, what a huge difference. Well,
Yeah.
and also persistence. I mean, don't give up. Keep following up and making sure you didn't miss anything. And to even have asked in the first place is such a valuable insight to realize you can ask, you can appeal, and that there's potential for huge gain. I mean, that you said it was 30,000 a year that she got difference in the package.
Yeah, and listen, these are. I mean, I see these all the time, but they're not. They're not. I wouldn't call them typical. But like you
Right.
said, there's no harm in trying. So at least ask, because maybe you'll pick up another couple $1,000 just for writing a letter or an email.
Right. I mean, talk about return on investment of your time. How much per hour was he making there by making those few phone calls and writing that appeal
Exactly.
letter? It
Yeah.
was it's very, very much worth your time to give it at least a try. So this has been really helpful. I know this is just scratching the surface of all the information that you all provide. And so I want to make sure if people want to find out more from you about how to navigate this whole financial process with the colleges, what's the best next step for them to take?
Well, my website is lockwoodcollegeprep.com, but in terms of like a quick sort of primer on how everything works, we're giving away this report that I wrote called "How to Hide, quote unquote, hide your money from the financial aid office," and that's available right here, I guess, on this page. Right, there's a
We're going to put a link actually right below this interview. So if anybody's watching, you want to find out more about, is this, Andy, the kind of stuff we were talking about earlier with what to do with the different elements of the form where you might fill in different parts, and that's going to shift how they would interpret your estimated family contribution, that type of thing. It's more details on that.
Yeah, it goes over the exemptions and some of the exceptions to the exemptions and strategies. So it's a pretty good strategy, starter way to dip your toe in the water.
Yeah, that'll be really helpful. Everybody needs to be filling out these forms, even if they don't think that they're going to qualify for anything, because hopefully if there's one takeaway that you're walking away with from today's interview, it's don't make assumptions. Don't just, go off of what your friend's cousin said. You need to fill these forms out yourself and see if you actually qualify, because you don't want to be leaving this much money on the table. This is a huge amount of money cost that you're going to be paying out in terms of the cost of college. So it's worth your time to fill out a form, and it's worth your time to do it right. So make sure you get that link below the interview. Just click, it'll take you to Andy's website. You can grab a copy of that report on what you need to know in order to make sure that you're not oversharing with the financial aid office. I love how you put that before. So also, if you've been watching today and you want to share this with someone that you know who might be stressed out about paying for college, please make sure that you feel free to share the link with them. Just go to yourteenreadyforcollege.com. They can go there anytime. Just sign up to get access to the interviews. And this replay will be up for 48 hours. So they can watch it for free, can share it with your friends, share it with your guidance counselor if you want to. Maybe they'll get some information too that they can share with their families. Because that link on that website is free to get a copy of how to approach the financial aid process a little bit more strategically. And then also, if you want to get a copy to keep, maybe you're not ready to fill out your financial aid forms right now, but you want to remember this, you want to go back, maybe you've got multiple kids going through the process and you want to hang on to this interview from Andy for a while. We've also got the success package available for you all. So you can get a copy of that at yourteenreadyforcollege.com/event. It's $100 off right now. It gets you all the recordings, all the transcripts from all of our interviews. And it also gets bonuses from a number of our speakers. And I know you have a bonus that you're going to include in there, Andy, as well. That financial aid and scholarships negotiations masterclass. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because that sounds so intriguing.
Yeah, that's probably my most popular product. I'm primarily a consultant, like you are, but I teach a course, and it goes through all of the all the potential arguments that you can make in terms of let's say you had an unusual circumstance that had to do with your income. Maybe 2 years ago you had a high income, but since then you got laid off, or you got an offer from another college, or there's probably 8 or 9 different types of arguments that I outline. Plus, I have some sample letters, for different situations. Plus, I also do a complimentary review of your letter before you send it in. we sell it normally for $300 or more. And, based on the feedback that I've gotten over the last 5 years when I first developed this, some people use the advice in there to get an extra, 2,000, 5,000. I even had one guy tell me he got another $12,000 from it. So,
Mhm.
so we think it's fair at 300, and it's a gift for you guys. So it could be a windfall for you.
Absolutely. That bonus alone, you all, I mean, if I had had that when I was applying to college, it would have been so valuable. And I didn't even know, like I said earlier, that negotiating was even an option, much less how to do it. And I think a lot of families are in the same boat. So if you're thinking at all that you might want to go through that negotiations process with your school, once you get your award letters back, it's definitely something that you want to have in your toolbox. So again, you can grab a copy of the success package at yourteenreadyforcollege.com/event. You can find out more about it there, and then it'll include that financial aid and scholarships negotiations masterclass from Andy, which is so thoughtful of you. Thank you so much for including that. I'm so excited that our families are going to get access to that as well.
Good. Great. Me too.
So thanks everyone for watching. Make sure to share with your friends. I'm really hoping that this is going to help lower everybody's stress and make them realize, look, there are things that are in your control that you can do. The deck is not entirely stacked against you. At least you can find out the ways to put some of that power back in your corner and feel like this is going to be achievable for you after all. So thanks for joining us. Thank you again, Andy. This has been so helpful and so much fun as well.
All right. Thanks for having me, and great job with your event.
Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. I'll see you soon. Have a great day. Bye.